But let's have a look through the papers for you right now with Ceri Dingle, Director of Education charity WORLDwrite, and economist Ashok Kumar. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you both. Let's kick off with the Sunday Express. Ashok, looking at US sanctions and Iran.
Yeah, so Sunday Express, new US sanctions will topple Iran's vulnerable regime, is the claim, within 2 years. Now, I think we need to take this with a grain of, salt, because I think, these same groups, kind of shadowy groups based in various different Western countries, were the ones that were saying that, the US and the UK would be greeted as emancipators in Iraq. We know the truth around that we're supporting the bombing of Libya. Now Libya is a nightmarish, wasteland where there's a return to slave auctions. So the real sort of loser, I would say, and there's a lot of support for, a lot of evidence for this, is the real loser will be the U.S. Kind of part lunatic, part doofus Trump pulling out of this deal purely, really, because it was signed by Obama. There's a higher possibility that that'll lead to further marginalization of the U.S. and that actually the possibility of Iran, the Iran regime toppling within 2 years, there's a higher possibility that the U.S. will become a pariah state before that happens.
But you see, within all of this, I've got to say, I don't understand all the implications of all of this. Certainly the UK government is saying that the US should stay in the Iran nuclear deal, but we can't actually say Trump is a doofus, or can we anymore? In the sense that whether you like him or not, what is happening with North Korea and South Korea is actually pretty impressive.
Well, that might be impressive and a good thing, although I think that's got a lot to do with Kim Jong-un realising that there's a lot more to being liked in the world than just being seen as forever a pariah state. But I think the real losers in the end of the Iran nuclear deal are the Iranian people, in fact, and they're not getting a look in this. And I think the idea that somehow the Iranian regime's going to get toppled because of this, whereas I would see that the Iranian regime are more likely to play up the anti-American card and that they're being victimised again and play that sort of nationalist card, and it isn't going to mean an end to a reactionary
Iranian spring.
Well, I don't think we are going to see that, sadly. And I think sanctions always hit the people, don't they?
I was going to say, we did see for the first time in a long while the burning of the American flag. Although at the end of his announcement at the White House about coming out of the deal, President Trump did say he was thinking of the American people and almost appealed to them that he wanted to return them to some sort of quality of life.
Well, that's mythical, but the idea that America is doing this on behalf of the Iranian people, I think, is an absolute joke. I think it's a lot of moral grandstanding and bluster in the world, and it's long been Trump's beef has been Iran. We know that, even before the election.
But the bluster could work, as it did with North Korea, or seemingly has done with North Korea.
It
wait to see on the 12th of June.
a hell of a lot of
the
things.
idea that Trump's bluster worked in North Korea, rather than the fact that North Korea and South Korea are the main drivers of that, I think is a stretch.
Well, I don't know. That's one of those. With all of this, we don't actually know.
And we still have to get to June the 12th. Let's have a look at the Telegraph. This is quite an interesting story. This is about this UN envoy who said that Brexit has made Britain racist, but not so, say the Telegraph.
Well, I think it's an interesting riposte, actually, to the idea that this UN rapporteur has come over and said, done a little 12-day hike round Britain that's been widely reported and discovered that Britain is teeming with evil white working class bigots, racists and Islamophobes and so on. And I think it's very, very mythical. And I think we already know that. And she's talked about the impact of the Brexit vote, and the Windrush scandal and so on. And this piece in the Telegraph is pointing out that actually Brexit doesn't necessarily show anything of the kind. I would argue that the hostile environment policy, initially by Blair and then by May, which led to the Windrush scandal, was a racist policy. There's no question in my mind that was the case. But I also think that the EU, which lets people drown, is not some great anti-racist institution. But that doesn't mean that then all the rest of us go along with that stuff.
I mean, every to the right politician out there would say it's a hell of a stretch to say that immigration policy is racist.
Which one? The Windrush one?
Well, the hostile environment. Well, of course it is, because it basically says, as Blair did, you can let in EU migrants, but you can't let in people from the rest of the world.
Well, no,
we know that people have been.
It wasn't just Windrush. People who aren't meant to be here.
Well, it wasn't just Windrush. We know that, and I've been following deportations for many, many years. From Stansted in London, 25 to 50 people have been deported every week for more than the last 20 years. So it's not some new thing.
But are they people who are meant to be deported?
Well, you look at who those people are.
I mean, the whole point about the Windrush scandal is that these are British people who should never have been.
But you look at the reality for those cases. Every one of those people not only should enjoy the same right to live where they choose as the rest of us, but they all have things like kids here, or they've worked here, or they've paid taxes here, or they've slipped through some horrible loophole. And the reality is that we don't treat people fairly if they come from outside the EU, from the rest of the world. And the idea that somehow the Remain camp are some great anti-racist body, I think is quite mythical, because actually they have been responsible for upping the ante against migrants who are not from Europe.
Yeah.
And I'm very much for freedom of movement for all, but I do think that has to be a debate. We have to consider control of our borders, and just because you want a sensible discussion about sovereignty doesn't make you racist or xenophobic, which is what this woman, this UN rapporteur, has insinuated.
Have we got time for one more? No, we haven't. Okay, we're going to go to a break. I'm being told very firmly. Back with more papers in a moment. It's Sunday morning, so what better to talk about, Ashok, than ice cream?
Yeah, well,
this is your favourite, isn't
ice cream for ice cream for ice cream, ice cream.
Caramel for me, please.
Yeah, look, I mean, right now, this is really the tragedy of our generation, I think. Haagen-Dazs, along with Magnum and other ice cream brands, are shrinking the amount of ice cream we get at the same price. It really is a kind of metaphor, an allegory for life under late capitalism. You know, pay more,
give over,
get less,
give over,
get fatter and unhealthy. It's really, it's just tragic. It makes me upset. I feel emotional.
Or isn't it just helping us to live longer, because we're not going to be shoving so much sugar down our
Julian. I mean,
is Haagen-Dazs paying you to say that?
It is a rip-off when they shrink the amount for the same money. Yeah. But I do think, I think you're right, Julian, although I disagree with you profoundly. Everyone is now doing this on the basis of sugar content. They're reducing the portions, and I just wish people would get out of our diets.
No, but they're saying it's because of rising commodity prices.
Stop telling us what we can and can't eat.
You know,
and
just
let's enjoy our salted caramel.
Does it apply to Ben and Jerry's?
It probably does.
I hope not.
Oh no,
we need our
Ben and Jerry's.
It's such a shame. Bring out the ice cream.
Oh, there's nothing better. Sometimes I go deliberately hypo so I can hit the ice cream. It's not true. Sunday Telegraph, Ceri. Look at snowflakes.
Yes, actually. I don't like this term, because I think it's very rude to young people. But the interesting thing about this article is that this commentator is saying, well, we shouldn't just blame young people for being seriously, pathetically vulnerable and victims and easily offence-taking, but that adults are to blame for enforcing this culture of you can't say that. And so the article looks at words we never knew about 10 years ago, like cultural appropriation and microaggressions. And I think it's right, it is something we should take the mickey out of, because it is absurd.
Well,
I mean, the idea was so pathetic and easily offended.
See, I hate the fact that actually Ashok is desperate to get stuck in on this.
But we're going to have to offend you now, because we're going to go to the sport.
Yeah. Okay, Ceri, let's have a look at the Sun on Sunday, looking at Leveson Part 2.
Okay, I mean, I like this piece just because it's headline is Floor Lords, referring to the House of Lords. This is a piece by Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's, you know, very principled on some things, and I disagree with on others. But he does make the point that for him, the Lords is going wrong in not doing its duty of protecting liberty by not contradicting things that are in the party's manifestos. And he goes back to look at Henry VIII and how the Lords was supposedly a check on those problems. I would see that's complete nonsense. The Lords has always been wholly undemocratic and a check on what we the people want more than anything else. And this is really about the return to Leveson 2, which after last week, when Section 40 was thrown out, which would have penalised anyone, whether they win or lose in terms of a small paper, if they lost in a sort of libel suit, that got thrown out in the Commons. This data protection bill has gone back to the Lords, and I think it's Baroness Hollins is sneaking in a second attempt to get an amendment in bringing Leveson 2 back on stream in the Lords, which is an awful piece of anti-free press freedom, free speech legislation, which will further curb and regulate a press, and I think it's very bad news. And as Rees-Mogg says, Britain is already ranks 40th in the free speech global rankings. And I think the idea that we want more regulation rather than little people like you and me have the capacity to not listen, not read, and to say no thank you to stuff, rather than having these undemocratic people tell us what we can and can't read and think.
Okay, any thoughts on that? Let us know. Observer, Ashok, to the TUC protest that we saw.
Yeah, there was a massive TUC demonstration yesterday, and sort of they're really trying to target some of the changing, you could say, conditions of working life and for the working class.
They're calling for a new deal, aren't they?
Yeah, they're calling for a new deal, and you know some of the statistics are quite jarring. Actually, you know, since the financial crisis 10 years ago, real term wages have fallen by 4%. That's 24 pounds fewer in the average worker's pocket per week. In the last 17 years, the average worker has lost 18,500 pounds. It's the first time in 200 years, actually, that wages and real wages are falling since the sort of emergence of industrial capitalism. So it's really quite startling, these statistics, and the campaign and the demonstrations were really about trying to fight casualization, fight against wage stagnation, but also specific issues. There was one speech that was given by a worker at TGI's, which is on strike, in London, a restaurant worker who says, the company takes 40% of the tips. That's not what people think when they're tipping workers, and there's no excuse for that. And so it's actually taking specific target at a culture and also at an economy that thinks that they can put more and more downward pressure on the lowest paid workers.
We've also got to remember that we've got the lowest unemployment on record, haven't we?
Yeah, but unemployment figures are funny, right? Because if you're a casual, 30 years ago, if your unemployment numbers were more accurate, you could say unemployment is decided by how many people are in employment, but also how many people are going for work. If the number of people are going for employment falls because people are underemployed, which because the labor market is hollowed out, there's loads of people that are underemployed. That's what casualization is. They're technically not unemployed, so statistically they're fallen, but their wages have plummeted, and they're underemployed, and they're casualized. So even if you're employed, and your unemployment figures can come down, but also real wages can come down, and the amount of distribution of wages has fallen. So it's like unemployment is just one figure in a myriad.
It's interesting
of
when you
metrics.
look more closely at the statistics, how they can be interpreted, isn't it? Ceri, let's move on so we can fit one more in. Let's have a look at the Express war on plastics very quickly.
Oh yes, well, I have to say, I think this is quite funny, really. I mean, I know it is now so cool and trendy to have your bamboo straw or whatever it is you might have.
I'm
only saying that because Gillian's got bamboo straw, which is probably maybe it's nice.
By myself?
You can get sugarcane ones as well. The point is that now plastic is this apocalypse. The world, we are drowning in plastic, and you think, hang on a minute, aren't there bigger issues in life? And actually, it isn't true that sea life is dying from tons of dumped plastic. It's actually illegal. No, it's illegal to dump plastic.
Yes, but it is true that sea life is dying.
Litter is bad and should be picked up. Those things are true. But you would think that the world is one big plastic sewer, and it isn't. And now we have a situation where the army, going green, as long as it drops non-plastic bombs, it will save the environment, you see.
Well, look, you need to watch some of our documentaries.
I've watched lots of them, and I love The Blue Planet and all of those things, and I love
Didn't
sea
you
life.
see the scene where they open the bird in the
Yeah,
stomach?
and the whale. I grew up on a farm. You go and find a bird, and you can find it full of all sorts of stuff. Absolutely true. That does not mean the world is swimming in a plastic sewer, and that the army is going to save the world by not using plastic.
We are out of time.
We're going to have to educate Ceri, aren't we?
I would suggest you watch Plastic Tide, one of our documentaries, and it might change your view on that.
And then all we need is non-plastic bombs, and you can blow the planet up.
Yeah, we are out of time, Ceri.
Save the fish.
We're going to play the documentary
We are
right now.
We'll teach you a lesson in a moment. More papers in a second. So we'll leave the papers with Ceri and Ashok. Mail on Sunday, Ceri. Can we just have a look at apologising for jokes?
Oh, yes. Well, I think this is quite funny. This professor got stuck in a really, really crowded lift, and there happened to be another professor of gender studies also in the lift, disastrous, and he did the kind of ain't half hot mum thing, which used to happen in lifts when you get to a certain floor in a department store, and he went, what floor do you want? Ladies' lingerie. And this professor of gender studies has felt that she has been sexually abused and assaulted by this evil man saying ladies' lingerie.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really funny. And no, he shouldn't apologise for a joke. And it's quite interesting if you read his history. He was a kind of civil rights movement freedom fighter in the South against segregation. And now he's an evil, sexist pig.
Well, if you can get into trouble for things like that, I think I've had it, Gillian.
You can't say ladies' lingerie.
Calling HR straight after this.
Right, we're out of time. We shall see you two a little bit later on.
Thank you.
Now, let's have a look at the papers once again for you today with Ceri Dingle, Director of the education charity WORLDwrite, and economist Dr. Ashok Kumar. He doesn't like me saying that.
So why did you do it? Just to wind him up.
Big him
You know
up.
he hates
Well, no,
it.
I hate it.
Because it's a
The
fabulous
words that
thing
come
to
out
have a
of my
doctorate.
the words that come out of my mouth are valuable regardless of the doctor or not. I don't need the doctor.
Why'd you do it then?
Have you got it on your credit card?
No.
Oh, I've got it on mine.
Oh, that was just so he could drop in that here.
Oh dear.
Did you
Should we
notice
move on
that?
to the papers?
Oh, yeah, if you want to. Go on.
We're starting with the Observer, Ceri. This is about students. They're wanting a re-vote of sorts on Brexit.
Yes, I mean, I do think this is a shame. It says here, a million students are joining calls for vote on a Brexit deal. And first of all, it's not quite true. This is student organisations and student leaders claiming they represent a million students demanding a re-vote on Brexit before the final deal. I don't think that's true of the entire student population
No,
or of all young people. So I don't think that's a legitimate claim. And secondly, if you read a lot of the articles on this, there's more than a whiff of ageism. This idea that older people have all been terribly evil and racist and horrid and xenophobic and voted for breakfast.
Breakfast.
Breakfast would be a good thing. Voted for Brexit, whereas young people are supposedly so radical they all voted Remain, and they're worried now that there are these young people who haven't had a chance to vote yet, who will be old enough by the time they go to university in the fall. And I just think it's very sad that this is really not good for young people. It's pushing this entitlement culture that, you've had such a terrible time and these old people have done a terrible thing to you, rather than thinking, well, actually, the call to vote Remain by young people, which has mostly been about rail cards, student exchange programmes and your research grant is not some great blow for democracy or sovereignty. And older people who, like me, who voted for Brexit, actually might have the interests of young people all over Europe at heart, in that we want to have more control over our lives.
Go on, that shot. You're itching to get him.
Well, the polling data does suggest that older people did vote Brexit and younger people overwhelmingly voted Remain. So that, in terms of the polling data, and we know that that's the case. I mean, that's the case, right? There's an intergenerational divide. Secondly, I think it's a bit.
It's not a healthy one, though.
Right. I mean, and so there is a divide, and the idea that young people only support this because of interrail passes, etc. I don't actually think that does it justice. I'm not necessarily supporting this campaign, or I don't have an opinion on this, frankly. But I think that there's a myriad of issues of why young people overwhelmingly supported Remain, and older people voted to leave. It's not just these kinds of
But one is
narrow...
a democratic wish of 17.5 million people, and one is about thwarting it, which is what student unions and student leaders are going for. And they're ones to talk. Like the EU, they tend not to have very many votes in student elections these days, or represent very much, but they want to call the shots and make more regulatory policies. I don't have much time for it, and I think we should tell youngsters the truth.
It's not just youngsters calling for a rethink there on Brexit.
No, of course. There's plenty that want to thwart it, especially the Lords.
Well, look, have your say on that, whether you're a student or not, at Sky Stephen, at Sky Gillian. Ashok to the Sunday Mirror. Oh, dear. Crystal meth found at the Home Office.
Well, yeah, it's like at the Home Office. They didn't find, a bit of ganja or a bit of cocaine. They found crystal meth. And it's the third incident in 6 months. And considering the fact that in order to get into the Home Office, you have a rigorous amount of security checks.
Well, yeah, they're not checking you for drugs, though, are they, going to the Home Office?
Well, of course, but, if they're finding multiple bags of various drugs, including crystal meth, multiple times over the course of 6 months, it's like an epidemic, practically.
Come on.
Not really, but you're like, how are you eating meth that bad that you need to sneak it past security and into the Home Office? I mean
it's must be some civil servant somewhere
who
has an issue.
Yeah, there's some addictions going on. Yeah.
And is it the third such incident involving crystal meth specifically?
No, it's
third
a
sort of
drug-related at the Home Office. It's pretty...
Oh, yeah, well, I feel whoever is involved in that, I feel quite sorry for, because it's an awful addiction to have crystal meth.
It's one of the worst.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Sugar's probably a terrible addiction.
Yes,
that's
can we
awful
talk
link.
about sugar?
But let's talk about that in the sun.
Awful link, Gillian.
It's a very good link.
Jamie Oliver.
Terrible.
Well, no, it's a very good link, because Gillian's right. Sugar is being made out to be the new crystal meth, and according to public health warrior Jamie Oliver, who is a killjoy and a busybody, great recipes, by the way, great cook, but he should just get out of our diets. You would think that sugar was the new crystal meth, and he's just got found out. His milkshake that he pushes on the web has got 6 times the recommended sugar limit. Well, there you go, Mr. Oliver. Get out of our diet, and we might stop showing you up for your, cock and bull recipes and milkshakes. But I just think that this panic about obesity and sugar it's like the plastic thing. It goes on and on and on and on and on.
Let's not go back on that.
We won't go back on plastic, but I just thought I'd zip that in there because it's another panic.
I got nothing to add to this.
No. No, but
you may want to check next sugar rush.
Yeah, you may want to check out skyoceanrescue.com, and then you can make up your own opinion.
And Plasticus, very unplastic. Well,
all right, we're going to go to a break. No, not like that at all. We're going to go to a break. Back with more in a moment. Okay, looking at the papers with Ceri and Ashok. Ceri, Sun on Sunday, it says bosses can't make you wear heels anymore.
Well, there's
You're a lady, aren't you? You should be wearing heels.
I should be wearing stilettos, and then you could plant one in the crotch at the right moment. That's
we're going to have to talk.
We'll have to have a word. I can't actually wear heels because it just cripples me, which is a shame because I think they could be a good thing. No, I do think that women are quite capable of telling bosses where to go if they're told to, show more cleavage or wear high heels or put on fishnets or whatever it is. Yeah. And women have done that. I got sacked when I was young for refusing to do the, lift me up thing. and in a pub and various things, because you just say what you think. And I think the more women do and have over the generations, the more things have changed.
Yeah, I think it's quite
And I don't think we need more legalese and protection from evil bosses, because I don't think they're everywhere and that it's a huge problem, and B, I think we can stand up for ourselves with the appropriate
But this gives you more power to stand up for yourself, because it's saying that bosses wouldn't be required.
Yeah.
You could say, let's say you're working in, like, yours is a case in point. You're working in a pub, you don't have that much power over your boss. Your boss says you got to wear heels, and you're like, you know what, the law says that you can't force me to do that. It gives you more power to assert yourself as a worker.
Well, no, I don't agree, because that's like, we always need more protection, we're not capable. And actually the major changes that we've had for women have been about what women have done themselves, not some grandee saying, oh, I must protect you from evil bosses.
But what you have to remember is not all women are going to be as vocal as you, and a 19-year-old working
surprised.
in a pub is quite different to an older woman who's perhaps got more experience.
Well,
so that protection does help. I think I agree with that.
Well, I don't know, because I think things have changed massively these days, and encouraging young women to get other people on their side if they've got a dodgy boss would be the best way forward. And B, I don't think all bosses these days are this great sexist scourge. I think most of them have had their day. And I also think there's a lot of young women, like the Grid girls, like the Formula One girls that I'm very excited to be filming in a week's time, who want to dress sexy as hell, and that's how they make their living. And I'd have to say good on them too.
And that is their choice. Ceri and Asha, thanks so much for taking us through the papers this morning. Thank you. Let's see what's happening with the sport now.